Many months ago, before the pandemic had stopped our Sunday evening worship, we had begun a study through the book of Genesis. And we had actually worked our way through to the beginning of chapter 25. And for the next couple of weeks, we'll pick up the storyline there. The end of chapter 24 and 25 were sort of sad parts of the story. Abraham buys a cave and buries his wife Sarah, who has just died, and Abraham is grief-stricken, but in his grief he winds up buying the first piece of land that Abraham will own in what becomes the promised land. And at the beginning of chapter 25, Abraham himself is buried there, and poignantly, he's buried by his two sons. Isaac and Ishmael, who'd had quite a division one from the other, actually end up coming together to bury their father. And it's kind of a neat sign of reconciliation that the two boys come together to do that. And so we pick up our story where we left off, and we see the flow of God's plan working its way out through the family of Abraham. We're going to read a strange text tonight. It is through Isaac that the line continues, and through Isaac to his sons Esau and Jacob. And we're going to ask some peculiar questions as we read that text. I was looking at the calendar today, and on the 1st of November, 1503, a man by the name of Giuliano della Rovera was elected Pope on this day. He would take the name of Julius II. And he was a month short of his 60th birthday. In the 11 years of his reign as Pope, he achieved worldly greatness as one of the great Renaissance priests, and his line to the papacy wasn't straight or direct. It was his uncle, Pope Sixtus IV, who had made him a cardinal, and he had given him the bishopric of several parishes, and as the bishops did at that point, he'd collected a number of parishes from which he exerted revenue. His was a strange ascendancy to the papacy. He bought and connived and twisted his way there. By the time he'd become a pope, he had fathered 3 daughters out of wedlock, and it was quite a process. He managed to buy enough votes to get himself elected. He got himself elected on this day, on November 1st, 1503, took the name of Julius II, and very, very strangely, one of his first acts when he became pope was to declare that in the future any papal election won by simony would be invalid. In other words, he ruled that you couldn't buy the papacy anymore, which was really strange considering he had bought the papacy. But he had a couple of other claims to fame. He fought 2 wars. He went to the battlefield himself. He's the last of what we call the warrior popes, the last of the popes to take up the sword during his papacy. But Julius' greatest contributions were artistic. He ordered the construction and the embellishment of a number of buildings and churches in Rome, and he laid the foundation stone for what would become St. Peter's Basilica. He is the one who commissioned Bramante and Michelangelo to work on St. Peter's Cathedral. And it is because of Julius II that we have a lot of the works of Raphael, and then his partnership with Michelangelo that gave us the creation of the great frescoes on the Sixtine Chapel ceiling. And so it's kind of strange when you look at the Sixtine Chapel, you look at the beauty of the frescoes on that ceiling, you look at the beautiful scenes that are there and the awe that they have inspired in generations of worshipers for hundreds of years. And strangely, they were placed there by a man who bought his way into office, who had led an immoral life, who had been to war as a pope, who had broken just about every rule of morality that you can imagine. And yet there he was as pope, and he gave us that beautiful work of art. And so we have a mixed assessment of his reign. Was he a good pope or not? Are the beautiful ceilings on the Sistine Chapel ceiling tainted by what we know about this man and the life of Michelangelo, who is a great artist, but not much more of a moralist? What qualifies you to be part of God's plan, we wonder? Or perhaps the question we ask most often is, what disqualifies you from being part of God's plan? Are there things you do that sidetrack you? And the questions become central to the story of Esau and Jacob. Two brothers who are far from perfect. Genesis 25, verses 19 to 34. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan-aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. I want to pause there for a minute, because if you have read the text of Genesis straight through in one reading, which is a good idea at some point if you have a chance, notice the stark difference between Isaac and his father Abraham. When Abraham wanted a child, he prayed about it. He was made a promise, but he took things into his own hands. You remember he had a little affair with the maid of his wife. He produced a child. He produced a son. Isaac seemed to have the patience that Abraham didn't have. For 20 years, Isaac prayed for his barren wife that she would have a child. And he didn't take it into his hands. He didn't connive and pull something on the side to sort of help God along. Isaac apparently had little more faith than Abraham. He prayed and left the matter before the Lord. So Rebekah becomes pregnant after her husband's prayer. The Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled within her. Apparently she's waiting for twins. And she said, "If it is thus, why is this happening to me?" The literal expression in the Hebrew is, "Why am I alive?" Apparently this was a pregnancy that was so difficult that she's like, "Man, this is, take me out of here. I can't take this." She's in so much pain, she went to inquire of the Lord. Apparently she's taken the example of her husband. Isaac was a praying man, and Rebekah does the same. The children are warring in her womb. She wants to know what's going on. She turns to the Lord, and the Lord responds. Now, we don't know how the Lord spoke to her. We don't know whether she heard a voice like Abraham and Moses did. We don't know if some prophet came to her and spoke these words. We don't know if angels came to see her like the angels that came to see Abraham to give her a message. One way or another, the Lord responds to her and says this, a strange little piece of poetry. "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." But when her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. They called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Jacob means taking by the heel. It takes by the heel, which interestingly in Hebrew has become an expression to mean that you're a cheater, that you're a bit of a conniver. If you're holding somebody by the heel, that's the expression in Hebrew. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in the tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. We have a strange word there. The Hebrew refers to Jacob as a quiet man, and it actually uses the word for a man who's orderly or upright. And we don't think it refers to his moral character, because as we'll see in a minute, he's a bit of a cheat and a conniver, but we think it has to do with his appreciation for order. Esau's out in the woods, he's out in the wild, he's camping out at night, he's hunting big game, and Jacob is happy staying at home, tidying his sock drawer. They're two different kind of men. And of course, in verse 28, we have the seeds of family discord. Isaac loved Esau, and Rebekah loved Jacob. You want to make us a mess in your family, have twins, and start taking sides. It's not a great start. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. There's a big debate about the word for stew. Some of our brothers and sisters who are vegetarians suggests that the word for stew in Hebrew is vegetarian. And Esau was a meat eater, and that was his problem. He ate a little too much red meat, and Jacob was a better man because he's eating stew. He's vegetable stew. He's a vegetarian. He's got a pot full of lentils, as we'll see in a minute. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, just so you know, the text does not suggest that you need to be vegetarian, and none of that's in the text. You got to read it in there, and it's got to be a bit of a stretch. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore, his name was called Edom. The name Edom in Hebrew sounds like the word for red. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." In other words, in exchange, trade me your birthright for some of the stew. Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Every time I read this text, my first reaction is, man, what a family. The mom and dad taking sides against one another, the mom and dad preferring one child over the other, these twins already fighting in the womb. It's bad enough that when the kids grow up, you have to settle them down when they're misbehaving. Already in the womb, they can't get along. You'll be interested to know that there are actually no perfect families in the Bible. I've looked for it. As I read through the scriptures year after year, I always look for the perfect family. A mom and dad, a good mom and dad with, 2 or 3 kids, well-behaved, everything. And there's none of those. Interesting. From cover to cover in the whole scriptures, there's no perfect family. The family that actually comes the closest, I think, is Saul's family. And Saul didn't turn out really well. So we really have no perfect families in the Bible. So if you worry that your family's a little dysfunctional, don't worry, you're in good company. I don't know if you've ever noticed that even the Lord Jesus didn't grow up in a perfect family. He grew up with his stepfather, not his real dad. He grew up with a stepfather, and his brothers and sisters didn't have a lot of patience for him. At one point, they even think he's crazy, and they try to have him committed. There's a number of natural questions, though, that arise out of the text and the contrast between Jacob and Esau. There's the age-old question of nature or nurture. What makes you turn out the way you are? Is it the way you're born? Is it the way your parents treat you? The way this Jacob is conniving and tries to steal his brother's birthright by selling him a pot of stew when his brother is hungry? And did Jacob just start out that way, or did Rebekah make him that way by preferring him at home? Where does all this start? And the other question we've got, of course, is who's the good guy in the story? Is it Isaac? Rebekah, the wife, was conniving against her husband. Well, we can't condone that. And poor Isaac, he's already slowly going blind. And in his own home, there's his wife and the kids conniving against each other. But Isaac preferred one of his 2 boys. Clearly, Esau's not the good guy. He seems to be a rough, wild kind of guy. He's out there in the woods, doesn't care for the niceties of home, comes back, doesn't care about his birthright, sells it for a bowl of lentil soup because he's hungry. The words that describe how Esau eats the stew aren't actually terribly polite. The Hebrew says he sat down, "Give me some of that stew." He woofs it down, and he says when he's done eating and drinking, gets up, walks away, and it's as if nothing. He's just given off his birthright for a bowl of lentil soup, and it's like water off the duck's back. Well, Jacob isn't exactly lily white either. So who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Who do you root for in this story? There's a couple things about the birthright you've got to know. I often tease in our family, we all have little things about birth order. I'm the only son. I'm in the middle. I have an older sister and a younger sister. And I often tease when I want a little bit of sympathy that I don't get the advantages of being the oldest because I've got an older sister who's the firstborn, and I don't get spoiled for being the last because I have a younger sister who got spoiled coming up because she was the last one, and I'm the only guy in the middle, and I got to do all the chores when my sisters got off free without the outdoor chores, but we all have complaints about our birth order. But the firstborn son, it was more than just the prestige of being the firstborn son. When you drive along the St. Lawrence River, if you ever take Highway 20 up to Quebec City, up through Gaspé and towards New Brunswick and the Maritime provinces, at one point Highway 20 goes a little bit higher, and you can look down at the St. Lawrence River from a distance, and you can see all the farms, you see all the farmland that used to be right along the 20. Before there was a highway, the farmland were all put along the river. And you could use the river to go from farm to farm to farm from the village. And the concessions were given to farmers. And after the concession was given to the farmer, he would divide it among his boys. The girls didn't get a share because they were probably going to marry some wealthy notary or doctor and make the family wealthy, so they didn't need a part of the farm. But the farm was divided between the boys. And then when those boys passed, they would divide the farm between their boys. And that worked for 2 or 3 generations, but the problem was you had these big, huge farms that were cut into 4 or 5 pieces, that were cut into 4 or 5 pieces, that were cut into 3 or 4 pieces. And as you go along the St. Lawrence and you see the pieces of farmland that come back from the river, you get pieces of farmland that are very, very narrow and that go back very, very far from the river. And it got to the point where after 2 or 3 generations, the farm was so small that you no longer had enough land to earn a living on. And that's always been the problem. When you're a farmer, when you're a landowner, and you pass away, and what do you do to your land? How do you divide your estate so that it can work somehow? And so what had been developed in biblical times is the oldest son is the one who would carry on the farm and the family business. So he had a privilege. Sometimes he was given a double portion, and sometimes he was given almost the entirety of the estate to carry on the family name and the family tradition. It was assumed that the father would die first, that the mother would be left with some of the sisters and some of the family, and so the oldest boy would get almost the entire estate. He would get a double portion of the money, but he was expected to care for his mom, to care for his sisters, to care for the extended family, and to keep the family estate going. And the other boys would become workers, would become workmen, they would become hired labor, they would do different things. But the oldest son, it was important that he get a larger share so that you could continue the family estate and the family business on through the generations. And so yes, in a way it was unfair that the oldest son got more than the others, but with that came prestige and honor and a great deal of responsibility. What does Spider-Man say? With great power comes great, or is that Batman? Anyway, one of the superheroes says with great power, comes great responsibility. And so the oldest son would inherit the share of the estate and the family name, but with that, responsibilities in the community. But in the thought of the birthright tonight, it's a little bit more loaded than that. What Jacob fights for and wants to get is not just a little bit more of Grandpa Abraham's money and of Isaac's estate. Along with that lineage from Abraham to Isaac come the promises that have been made to the family. The promises that would have been talked about, the promises that Grandpa Abraham had received, that he would get this land that his feet had trod, that God would bless him, that God would make a large nation out of him. I don't think Jacob is just after a little bit more than his share of the will and the bank account. I don't think Jacob is just trying to get the good set of horses and the nice cart from his dad. Jacob understands what's at stake. And so when he makes the comment about Esau looking down on his birthright, the suggestion is that Esau heard about all of this and it was like, who cares? Esau and Jacob had both heard about the promises made to Abraham. Jacob wanted in on it, and Esau didn't care. Esau and Jacob had both heard that the promises had been renewed to Isaac, their father. Jacob wanted in on it, and Esau didn't care. And so for Jacob, it's more than just getting a little bit bigger check when they went to the notary after Dad died. Jacob understood what was at stake. And so our difficulty then is, how do we make the choice between Jacob and Esau? Which one becomes the child of promise? With the generation before, it was a little easier, wasn't it? How do you choose between Isaac and Ishmael? Well, Isaac is the son that God had promised. Isaac is the son that God provided. Isaac is the son who was legitimately born between Abraham and his wife. Ishmael is, what do you call him, a stepson out of an illicit relationship with Sarah's maid. Ishmael is man's solution. Isaac was God's miraculous solution. So in a sense, with Isaac and Ishmael, it's clear Isaac is the child of the promise. But how do you choose between Esau and Jacob? Esau is the oldest son. Esau is the oldest son in the lineage of Abraham and Isaac. He should be the child of promise. But here comes Jacob. Some have suggested, Rebekah had also heard the promise. Rebekah also knew that there was this Abraham to Isaac to the next generation thing. And some suggest that Rebekah did the right thing, because when she inquired of the Lord, and the Lord told Rebekah, essentially, the lineage passes on to Jacob, not to Esau. It's your youngest twin who's going to be dominant over the older. The older one will serve the younger. And some have suggested all that Rebekah did was work out God's plan. God had told her this is the way it's going to be, and Rebekah felt she had to take things into her own hands. And then Jacob is the striver, the one who pushes, the one who wants it. And some have suggested that his pushing is just a spiritual name it and claim it. This is the way God works. They say, there's a promise you want, you just name it and claim it, and God will give it to you. And when God has promised something to you, well, you do whatever you need to do to get that. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. The text of Scripture definitely defines Jacob as a cheater and a conniver. And the storyline will pay him back. Some people suggest it's kind of like biblical karma. You remember what happens to Jacob, the cheater and the conniver. He winds up in Laban's farm. He sees the woman he wants to marry, and he's going to work for her for 7 years. And after 7 long, well, they're not long. The text says that he loved her so much, the 7 years went by like this. And on his wedding night, he gets married. He thinks he's got the woman he wants. And the next morning when the sunlight comes up, surprise, the wrong woman in bed next to him. So he has to work another 7 years. And the text goes on to explain that Jacob is just getting what he deserved. He's cheated everybody else, in his turn to get cheated. So the text definitely does not condone what Rebekah and Jacob have done together, and what they will do in the chapters ahead. In the end, God's sovereign plan works itself out, regardless of our deservedness or not, regardless of the circumstances. So what do? God makes this promise. There is something we think that God wants us to have. And it can be a great spiritual thing that we're striving after. We want the church to succeed. We want more people to come to faith. We want to become a missionary. We want to start a new Bible school. We have this great plan that we've got that we think that God has made a promise to us about. And what are we willing to do to make it happen? The text is clear that you can't condone poor behavior, no matter how lofty the goal or the ideal. And so what if God makes a promise that doesn't seem feasible? Should we help it along? It strikes me that this is the second of 3 generations of barren women with which God is going to begin his people. Someday somebody's got to give God some advice. God, if you want to start a large people as numerous as the sand on the shore, you shouldn't start it with 3 consecutive generations of barren women. Normally it doesn't work well to start a big people. Grandmother, daughter, granddaughter, all 3 of them barren. Rebecca's just the second one. It'll happen again. Interesting that Isaac knows the difference. Abraham will take it into his own hands and have an affair with his wife's maid. Isaac leaves it to God. He prays, leaves it in God's hand, and his wife conceives. There's a sense in which David will bring this waiting for God's time to perfection. David receives, it's more than a promise. Samuel comes to David and anoints him as the next king and says, David, you're going to be the next king. But Saul's still there. And time again, David's friends tell him, kill him. Get rid of him. At one point, they're even in a cave together. David is hidden in the back of the cave, and Saul comes in to have a nap for a little bit. He stretches out at the entrance of the cave, and Dave's at the back of the cave with a couple of his men, and they hand him a sword. They say, go ahead. This is your chance. God's given him into your hands. Take him out. And the monarchy will be yours. The throne is yours. Just do this little thing. Just kill Saul. And David is interesting. He says, I will not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. When God thinks it's time to take him out, God will take him out. And until then, I will not do this thing. So what do we do when God makes a promise that apparently doesn't seem to be coming true, that apparently seems to be further and further away? What do? You keep doing the right thing, and you trust God to work out his plan. At the Korean church, the Presbyterian Korean church in Snowdon, we had a little problem at one point. There was a young man who was serving as their pastor. He had been their youth pastor, and they wanted him to become their lead pastor. But his immigration file was up for renewal, and we applied to have his immigration file renewed so he could stay on for another 3 years in Canada and stay on as their minister. And then we realized that there was a problem in the file. They could only afford to offer him a part-time salary and for him to work part-time. And so we filled out the immigration papers and we said that he's going to be working half-time, this many hours at this much salary. But then we realized that the last time the immigration paperwork had been filled out for him, somebody had said that he was working full-time. And there was a fear that if we said that, no, he's half-time, that immigration would realize there had been a mistake on the earlier forms and they would disallow his immigration paperwork. And so we sat together, the elders of the church and this young man, and they said, what should we do? If we say the truth on the forms that I'm only half-time, it might not get renewed and I might have to go back to Korea. And I said, you know what you do? You tell the truth and then you pray hard. And so we filled out the forms and we said the truth. He's half-time, 20 hours a week. This is what he's on. We filled in the forms and we sent it in. And I'll forget the morning the young man called me and he said, immigration called me. They told me to come to the office tomorrow. They told me to bring my family and to bring our papers and our passports. What do you think that means? And I said, well, normally what that means is you're not coming home from the office. They're going to drive you right to the airport. That's what that means. And so we prayed hard, all of us, the next morning. They showed up at the office with his wife, his family, and their paperwork and their passport, just about convinced that they were going to get driven to the airport. And they waited all day with their 2 little girls, trying to keep them busy in the office. And we worried that somebody had forgotten about them. And at the end of the day, they were coming out to close the office at 5:30. And they realized they were still there. And they said, are you still waiting? They said, yeah, we're still waiting. We said, what are you waiting for? Well, well, here's an envelope for you. And they gave them the envelope. And in the envelope, the only thing I could figure is that somebody made a mistake. Based on the form we'd filled out for halftime, they decided to give them not a 1-year extension, but a 3-year extension. And then, contrary to normal protocol, they said, if you're going to be here for 3 years, you probably need to be covered under health insurance too. So we've given Medicare to both of you and to your 2 kids, which they weren't supposed to do. I thought that was pretty interesting. By the rules of protocol, they should have been accompanied back to the airport with their passports. And I don't know what happened, if somebody decided to be gracious, if somebody made a mistake, I have no idea. They came back with a longer residency permit than was supposed, and they gave them Medicare health care coverage. And I think that's what happens when you say the truth and pray hard instead of trying to force God's hand. But back to Jacob and Esau. In the weeks ahead, we'll think together about who becomes the child of the promise. We'll think together about what it appears to mean that God has chosen Jacob, the younger, over Esau, the older. And one of the questions we'll ask in our minds is this fair? Can God do this? Isn't this unjust? I mean, poor Esau, he seems to be cursed from the beginning. It's not his fault that he's the one who's born red and hairy, that he likes to go after wild game, that his father likes the big game taste, and that his mother prefers his younger brother. It's not his fault that he happened to share the womb with this conniving, twisting, go for it, gung-ho young guy who would do anything to get it. It's not Esau's fault. And yet, Esau despised his birthright and everything that went in with it. In the promise of God, Esau didn't care. He traded it for a bowl of red lentils and a chunk of bread. In the end, Esau can't complain that he didn't deserve what he got, because he got exactly what he deserved. He didn't care about the birthright, and he lost it. He didn't want it, and God took it away from him. But Jacob, on the other hand, Jacob can't brag that he earned what he got, because he hadn't deserved it either. It was entirely of the grace of God that Jacob, the younger son, is the one who inherits the promises and the birthright. And so there's 2 lessons for us, I think, in tonight's text. Aside from the one that when God makes a promise, you don't make it happen. You don't take shortcuts. You don't lie and steal and connive to make it happen. When God makes you a promise that seems to be getting further out of reach, you patiently wait, you do the right thing, and you wait for God's time. And then the question about the things that we get from the sovereign hand of God. Our redemption. I get this question all the time when we consider the texts that tell us that before the foundation of the world, God had chosen to show grace to some and not to others. Is it fair? Well, in the end, Esau can't complain. He got exactly what he deserved. And Jacob can't brag, because what he got, he didn't deserve. It reminds me of a text in Ephesians 2. Ephesians 2, verses 1 to 10. And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passion of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind. And we were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. This is what we deserved. This is what we had coming. This is what we had earned. But God, one of my favorite expressions in the scriptures, that's what we were. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness towards us in Jesus Christ. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Jesus Christ for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. As we celebrate communion tonight in our redemption in the Lord Jesus Christ, we remember that we did not get what we deserved. We were dead in our trespasses and sin. We followed the course of this world. We are children of wrath, destined for wrath. And so it would have been had God not intervened. God intervened in the riches of his mercy, in his great love with which he loved us. He made us alive together with Jesus Christ. As we break the bread and share the cup tonight, we celebrate and we give thanks for that which we did not deserve, but which we have been given through the rich grace and blessing of God.